Preliminary Analysis of Richards Bridge, Area 5, presented by Michelle Rathgeber and Chris Nance. 3CT11/22, also called the Richards Bridge Site, was the focus of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey and Society's 2015 and 2016 annual training programs. The site was listed in the survey's database as a Mississippi period site on which little scientific research had been completed. Collectors reported large stone tools from the site, but very little in the way of lithic debitage. Visits to the site and an examination of a small collection of artifacts currently held at the Arkansas State University station of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey showed a fairly typical assemblage of Mississippian pottery types. Walking the site also indicated that the artifact scatter was fairly large, with pottery and daub being the main components seen on the surface. Richards Bridge is located about 10 miles east of Parkin and appeared to be a Parkin phase site based on the small number of ceramic artifacts known from the site and the notes about the site being of the St. Francis type, meaning that it was a raised site with a moat and possible palisade wall, like the Parkin site. We have evidence that Parkin was the capital of the chiefdom of Caskey, likely the equivalent of the archaeological Parkin phase, and that it was a moated and palisaded site where people lived, protected from the threat of attack by the neighboring Pakaha chiefdom, the archaeological Nodena phase. Unlike the Parkin site, Richards Bridge does not currently have a visible moat or mound, but looking for evidence of those features was part of the research agenda. Based on Parkin and Nodena phase site distribution maps, Richards Bridge was close to the frontier between the Caskey and Pakaha chiefdoms. Because of this near-frontier location, Dr. Mitchum wanted more information about this site to better understand the Parkin phase as a whole and how people lived near the edges of the chiefdom's reach, likely mostly unprotected by the central power of the Parkin site and Caskey himself. This includes when and for how long the site was occupied, how many people lived there, how they were constructing their houses and organizing their village, and what activities they were undertaking. We don't intend to answer all of those questions today, but by focusing on one particular area of the excavation, we will talk about what we learned about this area and shed some light on the similarities of the pottery and lithic assemblages of Richards Bridge and other Parkin and Nodena phase sites. This will help us begin to understand how Richards Bridge fits into the larger picture of the region and help to inform the future analysis of the other 4 excavation areas. In 2014 and early 2015, Tim Mulvihill and Dr. Jamie Lockhart mapped the site and carried out remote sensing work across a large area. The gradiometry map in particular showed a large area of occupation with what appeared to be nearly 50 anomalies interpreted as possible burned structures. Based on the characteristics of the various anomalies on the remote sensing maps and knowledge of the gradiometry signatures of other burned structures in the region, 5 possible burned structures were chosen for excavation in 2015. Today, we will be discussing the analysis of artifacts from Area 5, circled in green. Area 5 was an amorphous anomaly on the remote sensing map and turned out to be fairly anomalous in the ground as well. The first 20 centimeters in each of the initial 5 excavation units consisted of mixed plow zone. Although the site was infrequently deep plowed or subsoiled, it was plowed at a regular depth and has been in cultivation for many years. Below the plow zone, many possible features and post molds were located to a depth of 60 centimeters below datum. Each unit was 2 meters by 2 meters with a 20 centimeter bulk wall on the north and east sides, which is what causes the gaps in the photo mosaic. This area turned out to be problematic for excavation because human burials were uncovered in 2 of the units. Excavation and analysis of human remains was not part of the research agenda of this project, and excavation units were chosen in an effort not to encounter remains if possible. When they were encountered, we consulted with the Quapaw tribe of Oklahoma, who are the recognized descendants of Native Americans in this region of Arkansas. Following consultation, some units were discontinued in 2015, and the area was not reopened in 2016. There is some evidence that this area may have been part of a house, but due to the limits on the excavation, the evidence is thin. One area in Unit North 542, East 596 had a high concentration of daub and looked as though it could possibly be a hearth at 50 centimeters below datum. But by 60 centimeters below datum, most of the daub had been removed, with no evidence of a solid hearth having been present. Another area in Unit North 540, East 596, directly to the south, had a lot of burned material that looked as though it could have been the remains of a wall at 50 centimeters below datum. This may be the case, and the daub fall in the unit to the north may have been part of that wall or have fallen from the smoke hole in the roof. A number of artifacts, including a broken pottery bowl and a clay pipe, were found at about 50 centimeters below datum, but a compact house floor was not noted in any of the excavation units, and despite many possible post features, only 4 of the marked possible post molds were actually found to likely be post molds through further excavation. Those post molds are marked on the map and do not follow any apparent pattern. 3 of them are also very close to what was initially interpreted as the hearth, which makes it seem unlikely that the area is in fact a hearth, as wooden posts used to hold up a thatch roof, being within less than a meter of a fire, could potentially pose a fire hazard. Perhaps they were smaller posts used for cooking or something else in the vicinity of the hearth. As you will see in the following slide, one of them does not extend completely through the daub layer. Here are the cross-sections of the possible post molds that were identified as the most likely to have actually been post locations after excavation. Only one extends beyond 60 centimeters below datum. Excavation in this area was halted after the 2015 field season in order to focus efforts on other more promising house excavations. So there are still questions about the burned structure in this area and what it may have been and what features it may have contained.
Despite Area 5 not shedding much light on the architectural features of houses, there were quite a lot of artifacts found within the closed contexts of levels 3 through 6, and those give us some basis on which to start to compare Richards Bridge to Parkin and other Parkin phase sites, as well as some Nodena phase sites. There were nearly 18,000 pottery sherds, weighing nearly 74,000 grams, or about 163 pounds. Interestingly, all of the pottery recovered from the excavation of Area 5 was shell timbered. Here are those numbers broken down by level. You can see that a lot of the pottery was excavated from the first and second levels, but because those levels mostly consist of plow zone, we can't be sure of their provenience as part of this structure. Also, many of those are small sherdlets that we looked through and counted, but artificially inflate the number of artifacts due to being broken up by plowing and crushing over time. We will be focusing on the pottery from levels 3 through 6 for further breakdown and analysis. We are missing the assemblage from one unit of level 4, but we will add that to our data before a final report. Also, level 6 is only made up of the 2 northernmost units. The others were not continued to that depth. As was shown, most of the pottery assemblage consisted of body sherds, and of those, many were undecorated sherdlets. We did identify other pieces of pottery in addition to body sherds, though. The largest category was rim or probable rim sherds, of which there were nearly 900. There were also 56 handles of various types from bowls and jars, 24 neck fragments, a pottery coil, and an elbow pipe whose contents were collected along with it for analysis, so the pipe itself was not weighed. We split up the decorated pottery by level to attempt to see if differences existed as we came down on what the excavators had originally thought of as the quote-unquote floor at 50 to 60 centimeters below datum. In level 3, punctated pottery was the most abundant decorative type, followed by incised, but most other Mississippi period pottery decorative styles are also present. In level 4, incised pottery is slightly more abundant than punctated, but with 1 unit's worth of artifacts from the assemblage missing, we aren't suggesting any real assemblage changes, and again, many Mississippi period decorative styles are present. In level 5, we again see more incised pottery than punctated with the rest of the expected Mississippi period decorative styles for the region. And we see the same pattern again in level 6. Although our overall sample size here is much smaller, This is also the level at which the pipe was uncovered at 51 centimeters below datum, as well as the pottery disc pictured. One thing to note about the punctated and incised pottery is that the Barton incised variety Togo pottery type that is common at Parkin phase sites has both incisions and punctations. So we speculated that we may not be seeing a change in the predominant pottery decorative style with depth, so much as a different sample of the parts of the vessel represented. When we ran the numbers, however, this did not turn out to be the case. The number of decorated body sherds far exceeds the number of decorated rim sherds. So the change in numbers of incised to punctated pottery in the lower excavation levels could not be completely influenced by the small number of decorated rims present in the assemblage. This suggests that there may be something different about the decorative styles in the lower excavation levels than those in level 3. And we will look for a similar pattern in other excavation areas, while still bearing in mind the small sample size and the missing FSN from level 4. So how do these pottery decorative styles compare to the decorative styles seen at Parkin and the Nodena phase site of Upper Nodena? Well, at a very preliminary glance of limited data from those sites, Richard's Bridge's pottery assemblage aligns more closely with that of Parkin than of Upper Nodena. Punctated pottery, much of which is Parkin punctated, makes up a much larger percentage of the Parkin phase assemblages than the Nodena phase assemblage. Incised pottery is also more well represented at the Parkin phase sites, and that could be a marker of the importance of Barton incised as a Parkin phase decorative technique that incorporates both decorative methods, as we suggested earlier, but that does not seem to be the case in the Richards Bridge assemblage. A more detailed look at the pottery than what we have presented here would be needed to draw any conclusions on that line of thinking.
Now let's turn to lithic materials. Just as was noted by local collectors, during the excavation and analysis, very little lithic material was recovered. Hundreds of flakes were recovered, but not the thousands that would typically be expected on a Mississippi period site. The types of lithic were typical of a late Mississippi period site, with Nodena and Madison points both present, as well as a Nodena point that was reworked into a drill. But we would usually expect to find more lithic debitage and points or partial points in a 4 by 4 meter area, excavated in parts to 60 centimeters below datum. The lithic material types were the typical Crowley's Ridge chert and Lafayette gravels, which could have been pulled from gravel bars in local rivers, or obtained from Crowley's Ridge to the west or outcrops on the east side of the Mississippi River. A Mill Creek chert flake was among the hundreds of flakes found, although the rest were Crowley's Ridge chert or Lafayette gravels. Mill Creek chert is imported from southern Illinois, and hoes made from it were used in agriculture and are found archaeologically throughout the region. The sheen develops through use and dulls the hoe blade, so these resharpening flakes stand out in an assemblage due to their light gray or tannish color and their sheen, and tell us that someone in the village owned a Mill Creek chert hoe and resharpened it in Area 5. The flake was excavated from level 5, so its provenience is fairly solid as part of the occupation of the area, as this is the level at which most of the daub and other evidence of wall or roof fall was uncovered. Looking at the lithic artifacts in comparison to the same excavations from Upper Nodena and Parkin as we did for the pottery, we see that there are many fewer identifiable tools from Area 5 of Richards Bridge. The other two excavations did not report flake data, so we will remove that from our data to get a better comparative look at the tools. Looking at just the identifiable tools, the main takeaway is how few there are in comparison to other sites of both the Parkin and Nodena phases. This low base number inflates the relative percentages within the assemblage, making them fairly useless as a comparative tool. The Richards Bridge Area 5 assemblage does have a slightly smaller variety of forms than the other two assemblages, with no scrapers identified, although the relative percentage of cores is the same across all of the assemblages. Overall, because the sample is so small, its size is the bigger takeaway than exactly what was identified within it. Overall, Area 5 of Richards Bridge has been an interesting area to start artifact analysis, if not completely informative due to limitations of time and space for excavation. The pottery assemblage conforms fairly well with a similar assemblage from the Parkin site itself, suggesting that the people living at the site likely identified with and as people of the Kaski tribe, or Parkin phase, and not the Pakaha tribe or Nodena phase. The lithic assemblage is odd, but conforms with what we knew from reports that it is very sparse. The reason for this is unclear at this time. The faunal assemblage is not completely analyzed, but at first glance, it seems that the usual Mississippian diet of fish, bird, turtle, deer, and small mammal are present. It remains unclear what Area 5 represents, likely a structure of some sort due to the large amounts of daub present, but what kind remains to be resolved. We are continuing on with analysis of Area 4 and will hopefully have a report for you next year. Thank you.